Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 511 of Six Pixels of Separation, the Mirum Podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's Sunday, April the 24th, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Tim Sanders. I am an author. I am also a consultant. I run a company in Las Vegas called Deeper Media. I focus a lot on sales strategy, and leadership development.
Welcome back, Tim.
Nice to be with you, Mitch.
I was looking back. The last time we see each other a lot. We see each other a few times a year out on the road. But the last time you actually did the show was 2011, which I think speaks to both of our longevity in this industry.
Right?
Crazy.
Right? We're on the cycle. We're like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. We're on the cycle.
Right. And I actually wanted to have you back. I usually do it when there's sort of like that moment in time. And the moment in time for you right now is the launch of Dealstorming. You've got a new book out. A lot of people know you from Love is the Killer app. A lot of people know you from the likability factor. A lot of people know you from Today We Are Rich. A lot of people know you from Saving the World at Work. You're prolific in this world of trying to get people to be, is it fair to say, happier at work?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that compassion and connection are things that kind of pull through my entire book. I'm a big believer in one-to-one relationships. And from Love is the Killer app, even all the way down to Dealstorming, I think I always kind of come back to that honeysuckle message.
So talk a little bit about that, because I sort of, when I think of you, I think of you're a positive force, and you've always been a positive force. And I think a lot of the work you do is around how to help people have positivity in the work that they do. And yet we live in very crazy times. We live in crazy political times. We live in crazy economic times. We live in times where people are very much affected by what I call the sort of swath of the Excel file. Like, let's just cut that line out, and you don't realize that there are human beings behind that number. Tons of consolidation, which means you have more and more people working for people they may not have known, or that are now part of a large entity that's even feeding into a larger entity. Do you feel that there's even more of a need to bring that positivity and strategy to it, or do you think that it's hard? It's hard for people to be like that.
I've come from a place in my life where I've seen that there's a real battle for us to all keep moving forward in life for whatever reason. And kind of trace it back to my roots as a kid, and you kind of know my background. Abandoned as a kid, adopted by my grandmother, special education student, got picked on a lot when I was a kid. I was raised to believe that success isn't a destination, it's a direction, the direction's forward. And throughout my entire life, though, I've seen how easy it is for institutions, bullies, circumstances to just keep us moving sideways. So, if I focused on anything, Mitch, over and over again, it's that the only way we move forward is to maintain our human touch and to practice generosity on a daily basis. So, Love is a Killer app's like move other people forward, right? The likability factor was be a positive emotional force and you'll move yourself forward. Saving the World at Work was about your company moving the world forward. Today We Are Rich, of course, was a memoir about this, what I'm talking about now. But even Dealstorming is about the idea that when you get stuck in a really big challenge, you can move forward by collaborating and creating connections with other people. So that's kind of the word for me is forward, because I believe sideways is the direction we keep getting nudged in by the forces of the world today. And in this increasingly high-tech, low-touch world we live in, it's especially a challenge.
And so with Dealstorming, I feel like there was a desire for you to get more specific in an area of business and also drill down into, I wouldn't say more tactical, because all your books had very tactical things, but more programmed.
Yeah, well, this is interesting. So I wasn't even thinking of writing a book to reveal my consulting strategy, which has been something I've been doing for years and years and years. That's how I've made most of my money, is by helping companies, from television networks to software companies to defense contractors, close really big deals that were stuck somewhere in the pipeline using a specific process that I developed years and years ago. But Mitch, I was having dinner 3 years ago with my bromance bro, Chris Brogan.
Sure.
And we were in Boston, and he took me to Legal Seafood Test Kitchen, and he asked me about my next book, and I started talking about some other motivational thing I was thinking about. And then he started to dig in a little bit like, yeah, but what do you do for your day job? Like what's the thing Deeper Media does? And I go, oh, it's not interesting, but it's this thing I do. Go into companies, they have stuff that's stuck, they have accounts in crisis. I create these deal storming teams. I teach them how to collaborate across departments. We 3x their closing ratio. We cut their cycle by 25%. I go, but Chris, it's not interesting from a motivational standpoint. There's no signature stories. It's very nuts and bolts. And he's like, slams his fist on the table. The software jumps, and he's like, it's a brilliant idea for a book, because people buy books because they're buying hope. And he goes, he knew from his personal experience that the level of deal complexity is just going through the roof. And that a tone like this, even though it would be very nuts and bolts, would be just as helpful, if not more, than even my most famous book, Love is the Killer app. And he kind of started me on a journey. So I went home and I talked to my agent, and my agent was like, absolutely, go talk to your clients, loosen up some of those NDAs, and let's think about sharing that process with the world. And so, we fast forward, we go to New York, and Penguin Portfolio says this is a great follow-up to our Challenger sale book. And there we had it, Mitch. We decided to write a process book that was repeatable and scalable, that accomplished a measurable thing, which was different for me, right? Because you and I were on the circuit, and we know how addicting it is to be able to move audiences emotionally. But I'm in a place right now where I want to move people practically. And I really feel like this 15 years of work on this deal storming thing, it is kind of interesting. So that's why it's been so exciting to hit the road for the last whatever days and share this methodology with all kinds of companies.
So I had a conversation recently with another person who's out on the speaking circuit, and they were talking about how, like, we were talking about feedback and the feedback you get, and we'd watch someone speak, and they didn't fare that well, but they were humorous. They sort of were likable, and after we were all talking together, it was the three of us, and the person said, I know I sort of tanked up there, but at least I got them to laugh and engage, and they came over and they were happy, and I was looking forward to the feedback. And then we sort of splintered off, and myself and this person were having lunch and talking about just the business of speaking and the things you want to accomplish on stage. And we were reflecting back on that little conversation post that presentation. He said, there's a lot of people when they speak, that they look at the feedback and they feel like everyone loved them and laughed and this. He goes, my whole thing is not that this person isn't funny or likable, they definitely are. He goes, my whole thing is when I look at feedback, I want to see one thing repeatedly over and over again, and that's something along the lines of, saw person X speak, and I feel like the information is something I can apply to work tomorrow. And when we started talking about it and unpacking that idea, it's true that, like, as a speaker, you just want people to like you. You want people to think you're nice, you're funny, you're warm, you emote well, and you do. You obviously want that. But if there's no substance behind that, and if it's not something they can apply in their work tomorrow, are you actually speaking to help the audience, or are you actually there to just have people like you, and it's self-validating?
Yeah, you have to make that decision. Are you a stand-up, or are you a change agent, right? I mean, you just have to make that decision. Nick Morgan, who coached me early on, taught me something really important. He's like, you can get a standing ovation, not get brought back. But if you get an important piece of that group to go change behavior when they get home that validates the insider's agenda, they're going to bring you back over and over again. So, he taught me that you have to ask yourself before you hit the stage, what are the couple of takeaways that are going to move the needle for that company, and that's what you focus on. And he's right. I mean, today, at least 70% of all my business is return, where I've been brought back. And the reason they bring me back isn't because somebody filled out a survey and liked me. They bring me back because they can measure the outcome of my talk, just like a consulting engagement. And I was giving advice to a new speaker just the other day, Mitch, and he was talking to me about, what does tailoring mean, right? Is it about pronouncing the name of the company right, or finding out the names of the titles? And I'm like, no. Customization is public consulting. This is where you, through preparation, understand the stakeholders' agenda for that event and how your expertise and, most importantly, your perspective connect with that agenda. You lend that as an outside expert, and you're extremely specific with them on what they're supposed to do. And through all of your elements, your personality, your research, everything, they decide to change. And if you do that, you're going to win in this space, because that's a very rare service of what we do. And so I have recently begun to think of like this idea of public consulting. And that's why guys like Peter Sheehan do 80 or 90 events, a year, because, you may not have heard of him. But I mean, I know you have, but I mean, the average person, he's not business famous per se, but this guy changes behavior. And I think that's really important. It's like the teacher. Best teacher you ever had didn't just make you laugh. They probably caused you to be a better student.
Or they probably caused you to be who you are today in terms of the work that you do. And it's interesting to apply this to the stuff you're bringing forward in Dealstorming, because I think people do look at the sale, and I think whether you're in marketing, business development, I mean, I think they're all very, very much intrinsically connected in this day and age, that there's a process. And I think there's the process. You have your process in Dealstorming, other companies have their process. And then there's this other thing, which is like let's call that the science. Then the other thing is like the art. How good are you in the room? How personable are you? What are those sort of things that we almost can't qualify or quantify that lean them towards you, even though your process may be unique, maybe not that different from someone else's or the other way of doing it. And what I found most interesting about how you bring forward your process is that it's almost like a hybrid, if I'm not mistaken, between like the scientific stuff and then how do you make that art stuff clamp on together? Is that fair?
Absolutely. So Dealstorming combines the lateral thinking of brainstorming, pattern association, building on ideas, I call it chemical soup, with the linear process of deal making. And by the way, Mitch, the linear process of deal making is very similar in its A to B to C to D as the linear process of programmatic advertising, the linear process of stage gate product development. I mean, anything that has a step-by-step process with the typical plan, do, check, act mentality, that's a linear process, right? So when you take a linear process, which most salespeople follow, but you combine the lateral process of creativity with it, you get breakthroughs. Because in the world we live in today, it's so complex for us to go through the levels of the sale or to solve sales challenges. We have to produce the unexpected, but it has to also be at the same time appropriate. And that's why I think the two disciplines, when merged together, have produced such stunning results, especially with respect to changing the culture of organizations. And, I know that marketing world, for you've had such an influence on marketing world over the last years. I find that most of my biggest fans of Dealstorming that want to bring me in to talk to their company, they're marketing people. And they're like, yes, we want to be at the table. There's an old saying that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And the marketing folks say, we need to be more aligned in the sales process early on. We don't want people to come to us for collateral late in the process. We want to be at the beginning of the process because we have the voice of the customer. We have creative elements we can bring to your process to move you faster. And I think that's the most interesting thing that I'm seeing right now in the lecture circuit. And one of the things I don't write about in the book, but I've certainly started to talk about a lot, is that we must abolish the concept of the internal customer. I told marketing, stop that. Don't buy into that. That's like servant idiotship for you to say that sales is our internal customer. You're just trying to make your CFO happy when you say that.
So define, what do you mean when you said the internal customer? What do you mean? That the sales team is serviced that way? Is that what you mean?
Now understand, I've served in both roles, right? So I've been in marketing, I've been in sales. So let me tell you this mentality. The mentality is that at an enterprise there is a profit center, and then the rest of the company is a cost center. Okay, there are the hunters who keep the lights on, And then there are the shared service providers who serve the hunters. Okay, and that's a mentality, and it's been going on since Michael Hammer. It's promoted by Peter Drucker. I mean, everybody talks about this because it's the efficient enterprise, right? So you have these cost centers called HR and marketing and operations and customer service, and their job is to be the ass end, pardon the phrase, of the value chain. And I'm not belittling it. I'm just saying that's how efficiency-driven management sees it. And at some point in the 80s, everybody bought into it. And so HR says, okay, managers, they're our internal customers. So our job is to get them the right staff and to get them the right training. We serve them, okay? And of course, as a result, managers treat HR accordingly. They treat them like a service provider. Well, guess what? This has happened to marketing too over the last couple of decades, where marketing says, okay, sales is our internal customer. So we're gonna try to be proactive, mostly with advertising programs and marketing programs, but mostly we're going to be reactive. They come to us, they say, we got a case study you need to develop. Here you go. We have some collateral you need to develop. Here you go. But at the end of the day, no one's collaborating. And what I've learned is that marketing is a profit center. They are just as vital as sales. But if they don't change that mentality and say, you need to bring us in early, then you don't have collaboration, because sales protects their silo because they think that no one understands the customer like them.
So that's the second part of the sort of note taking that was happening while I was reading the book. And I thought, my first reaction, I'd love your reaction to this, is I was sort of stunned by that. I was stunned that people don't intuitively see their coworkers as collaborators. It actually floored me. And I guess I sort of had to self-reflect and realize, well, Mitch, you've been running your own business for 15 years and maybe you forget what it's like in larger organizations. But I found that to be a stunning realization that people don't operate that way.
Oh, I'm going to blow your mind, buddy. I know I'm going to sound like the Sheldon character from Big Bang Theory here, but etymology is an obsession for me. I believe that the history of words, where they originate from, they're deeply coded into our psyche. They cause us to react like software, okay? So the origin of the word collaboration dates back to the 13th and 14th century in Western Europe, and it's a strung together series of words which loosely means to confer with the enemy. That's what collaboration means, okay? And it came from the dissident and the insurgent conferring together to overthrow the king, okay? Collaboration is inherently a very conspiratory, very disruptive idea. And so we don't naturally do it. Why don't we naturally do it? Because people have their own agendas. There is a really difficult moment in any project where you get everybody to go from me to we, right? Where you stop thinking about what's the marketing KPI, what's the sales KPI, and we come together. So you'd be surprised that collaboration is usually the last resort and not the first stop. Why is that? Well, as one sales leader told me when I was working on a project with the big company, when I said, okay, guys, we're stuck. And we need to bring in legal early because we're going to get killed on this contract with procurement later. And you better bring in the ops delivery department too, because you're never going to be able to figure out this real-time reporting thing. It was an ad program, big ad program. And then I said, and by the way, I want you to bring in marketing, including brand research. And the guy says to me, very seasoned sales leader, he says, are you kidding me? I'm not bringing in the land of slow. I'm not giving a vote to the world of slow. And so the land of no and the world of slow, that's a mentality we have outside of the silo because of our experience. And I say that's because you don't know how to run the process. Because the research, Mitch, is super clear here. MHI Global says that the world-class companies that sell 20% more than their competitors in B2B, the one thing they have in common is this collaboration habit. In fact, statistically, the winners in business are 3 times more likely to align sales and marketing at the front end of every big business opportunity. And it's just a habit people instinctively just can't get enough trust in to develop. And again, it's because I just don't think they have the right process.
But how is that still happening in this day and age? It blows my mind. We live in the what I call the Google world, where we have open floor plans, we have collaboration being like, you look at their sort of mission, vision, value statement, words, whatever that they paint on the wall in reception. Collaboration like now is probably right there at the top with hopefully trust or whatever it might be. And yet you're saying the output of that is still, yeah, but walk beyond the reception desk and it ain't like that.
Well, let me draw you a picture, okay? Because that's just a bunch of happy talk, right? That's like calling HR human resources when in fact in most companies they should just call it human rights. You know what I mean? So let me draw you a picture here. So at the far left end of the continuum of the most fake collaboration, I call it conversation. And conversations are good, right? You create an open floor plan, people have conversation, and what conversations usually do is they recover hidden resources. That's what the value is. I mean, now I'm not trying to make Steve Jobs sound cynical, but that was what the floor plan was about. It was just about no bones, getting left behind. So there's conversation. Conversation is not collaboration. On the far right end is delegation. Delegation is where you see somebody in the hall and say, dude, can you do this for me? That's not collaboration. But oftentimes we confuse conversation and delegation with collaboration. Collaboration is when you bring people together, you create a shared vision that transcends any individual agenda, and everyone is convinced to reveal everything they know and share what they think in the debate stage. That's what real collaboration is. And this reveal everything they know is harder than you think. Because most of the time in organizations, because we don't know how to run meetings, it's all happy talk. So we confirm the status quo, especially when we make the brutal mistake of trying to have a senior leader run a collaboration meeting. Awful. Awful. They think they can extend the umbrella of grace. They can't. They're so forceful in their personality. Everybody's so fearful to tell them something that they don't like. Everybody in the group just anchors around the senior leader's first idea, and they're not collaborating. It's either a delegation or it's just more happy talk to do the same thing they were going to do before they walked into the room. That's why I believe the account executive runs the deal storm. That's why I believe that you don't even invite a chief to the deal storm unless you truly believe he or she's going to add information value, because it just slows the entire process down. So I think the trick here is to really understand what it means to improve the level of insights and the possibility of pattern recognition for the account executive working in partnership with everybody who's got a stake in the outcome.
So this is really interesting. I was looking at this word collaboration forever. I mean, especially when we started, these open office plans and really taking on more Silicon Valley-like culture. And again, being an agency like we've been for the past 15 years, we sort of live and breathe in that loft space. It's sort of prototype for what you would expect and anticipate. And one of the conversations we had was on how do we get people to better collaborate. We kept having that conversation, and I don't know where I picked it up, and I stole it from someone. Some full disclosure, I did steal this. It's not like it was an original thought, but my idea was, why don't we sort of put collaboration to the side and just look at this word multidisciplinary? So you might have a front-end developer who actually does have an eye for design, and that person might just sit there and go, my job isn't to design and go, this site looks like it's from 1987. They're plugging away. But if you encourage them to do that, hopefully that person wouldn't say, well, I don't want to say anything about design because then I'm putting a swipe at someone who's several rungs higher than I am in the creative department, blah, blah, blah. And it sort of ties into that Steve Jobs Apple thing of he called them moments of collision, right? People are going to walk the halls. That's why it's going to be circular. And on the way, hey, what project are you working on? Oh, I saw something. And it creates that's what Jobs was talking about in that idea of moments of collision. Right. And, it's an ongoing process. I don't think we solved, it's solved here, or it's even solved when I talk about these ideas out in the open. But it's fascinating to me that if you are the person architecting a deal, whether you're the account person and not the slower operators above, that they don't always look at the people around them and think that person might have that skill set that I need to close that deal. They might look at that person and go, that person's in marketing, unfortunately.
That's right. And that's the issue. I mean, I believe it's not truly multidisciplinary unless someone asks, why is he here? If there's not a misfit in the room, it's not real multidisciplinary collaboration. Because a lot of times we confuse multidisciplinary with multifunction, right? So what we're really doing is we're taking like a discipline silo and we're inviting all the pieces of it, but they all do different things, so we think it's different disciplines, but there's no misfits. There's nobody from the outside. Let me illustrate this. So you read the book, the idea that Toy Story got shut down 9 months into production because it was just plagued by difficulties. Everything was going wrong. They couldn't render it in time. They couldn't figure out the facial controllers. The script was wrong. The budget was horrible. Black Friday, Disney shuts it down. The movie's going to die. And then Catmull gets the big idea that he's going to break the movie silo and he's going to bring in a bunch of misfits who, don't belong in meetings in a traditional movie studio, and they save the movie. Who are these misfits? Well, first of all, you have to ask, what did he think multidisciplinary was at the time? John Lasseter. Multidisciplinary at the time would be what? Script writers, animators, editors, software designers, and marketers that specialize in theatrical distribution. That you would think that's multidisciplinary, right? But they're all in the same silo because they're all connected to the same P&L, right? They just pass work to each other. So that's not multidisciplinary. There's no collision happening intellectually. So what does he do? He brings in circus puppeteers. He brings in adult psychologists, not child psychologists, adult psychologists. He brings in pricing analysts, the kind that, from Accenture or PricewaterhouseCoopers. He starts to bring in the most unlikely people to surround a space. They brought in rocket engineers too that worked on rapid controller development, so they brought in all of these unlikely thinkers that were able to quickly cycle through everything that was wrong with the vision of let's make an animated movie in a computer for the first time that tells a coming-of-age story from the toys' point of view where the toys are the main emotive characters. Now, that's impossible to do. So when I talked to Catmull about this years ago, he's like, by breaking down this silo and bringing misfits in and protecting the ugly baby, he said, I realized something. Toy Story was not a big idea. Toy Story was not a genius's work. Toy Story was simply 1,000 problems solved. And the wider you go, the more likely you are to notice something which can absolutely solve that little problem, just like, Eli Whitney adding an extra assistant that notices something that helps him make that little breakthrough for short staple cotton, which solved a problem, which gave him the credit for developing the gin, which in fact had been invented 30 years before he was born. It just didn't work right. Same thing goes here. My favorite story about diversity is where, a lot of times you think about Edison and all of his inventions, and, one of the ones we think about a lot is the incandescent light bulb, the one that screws in, right, that doesn't fall out. He didn't invent that. An assistant he hired watched him unscrew a paint can one day and had an idea for how to fix a really important problem about light bulbs falling out of fixtures. And the reason that Edison was so brilliant is because Edison had a rule inside Edison Labs. It was very simple. Ideas can come from anywhere. So when the janitorial assistant, who has no business having an idea in a meeting, brings this up, Edison protects the assistant long enough for people to debate the assumptions and explore the opportunities. That is collaboration.
Well, so I don't disagree with that. I think you're right. At the execution level, it is. But on the other side of that, we hear Toy Story, so you hear Pixar, you hear Disney. You think of Edison, you think of innovation, and you have to have that type of platform. Isn't the problem that when you take that execution part of it and put it into an organization that doesn't have at its core, forget the desire, the DNA to even keep pursuing something because they don't have that side of that's where creativity comes from, failing 5,000 times before you hit the idea?
Well, I think that to go back to Catmull again, he told me once, nothing provokes creativity more than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. Okay, so the reason I like a sales challenge, a big strategic sales challenge as a culture changing instrument, is because it's very measurable in an organization, right? So when you're trying to land a deal that changes everything, when you're trying to save your biggest account that just fired you, that's a crucible moment for a company that can cause a lot of us to put down our current practice and try the new. It can cause us, if we're led correctly through the process, to finish something we normally don't finish. But I think the other thing too, Mitch, is that leaders of companies today, especially sales leaders, they realize that they don't compete with other companies anymore, okay? They compete with the status quo. Because the level of complexity and self-research by customers driven by content marketing, it's so awful today that the biggest result of most of their efforts is we're not going to make any changes, thank you very much. So that crisis has motivated them to pursue something different, anything different. And they're pursuing all kinds of temporary solutions from content marketing to social selling and all these other things. So I think that the Petri dish is just right. for these kind of changes to take hold. And like I said, over the last decade, I personally witnessed companies make huge changes in this area, but it's driven by a crisis, and the crisis is either a sales challenge or an account loss.
I'm somewhat laughing because I remember finishing the book and saying to myself, now, did Tim just hoodwink me into trying to pretend that this is a sales book when he really was really writing a book about how to collaborate better?
I did, and so here's what the book's about. I mean, the book, because I'll just spoil the end for everybody. So, the book is about changing the culture at your company to be collaborative. Specifically, it's a leadership book about how to get everyone to treat collaboration as the first response and not the last resort. That's what the book's about. I just happen to find, Mitch, that solving a sales crisis is much more of a culture-defining act than fixing some business process around quality or developing a product together. And the reason why is because you can't control the life of the product like you can measure, we saved that account, we got it back, it's bigger and better than ever. Because over the last years, I've developed this philosophy that the culture of an organization is a conversation led by leaders, but punctuated by stories of very measurable outcomes and very clear crises, and they define how we do things here. And I've come to believe that there's just no way we can break the silos down at work. Forget about it. As long as you have budgets and humans with egos and let extroverts rise to the top, you will always have silo dwellers, okay? But you can build underground tunnels between the silos, and that's the act of collaboration. And I'm very concerned because enterprise today, they're trying to do battle in the marketplace where all of their buyers are already collaborating faster than they are. So yeah, this book really is about collaboration. I just think sales is a wonderful platform to drive that change through an organization.
Well, that was my other thought too. As I was going through it, I'm like, okay, so clearly Tim's making the case that sales hasn't been collaborative, and here's the strategy and tactics to make it so, and why. And I think that you sort of it's great. It's fun to read a book that has both the theory and strategy and tactics. It's something desperately missing in the world of business books, without a doubt. And you're a smart enough guy who's done enough of these, who's on the road speaking to people and growing your own business to know that you sort of have to hit all those mountains. Now you got to do the philosophy, the strategy, and the tactics. So fantastic. But then I'm also going, I know he's also a marketing guy. So do you believe that marketing hasn't been collaborative as well, or is it just a completely different beast then?
I think that when marketing works within its own discipline, it's very collaborative across the different functions inside the discipline. And I think that when marketing is asked to be collaborative, they are very responsive. I always believe that marketing most fundamentally wants to add value, wants to have a clear job, wants to have a voice at the table, wants to be strategic. It just really freaks out at the concept that they could possibly be linked in with finance and HR and operations in that world. So I think they're predisposed to it. I just don't think they ask for it. They don't demand it. They don't, put it forward on the agenda enough. So I'd like to see marketing get more proactive about collaboration, because collaboration doesn't occur on its own.
Well, the other part is, and this is selfish, Mitch, his new agency, Mirum, used to be Twist Image, going, oh yeah, and Tim, in a world where marketing automation and platforms and technology are taking over some of the process by which you take a lead and turn that into a customer, if it doesn't happen, shame on that business.
Right, and I'm telling you something, the tolerance of the prospect for our marketing tactics is rising dramatically. To give you another analogy, the shelf life for the average hack, because all new marketing programs are hacks, right? Unexpected approaches.
You have to define hack when you say it like that.
I'm sorry. Well, there's two kinds. Okay, I don't mean hack like personality of the hack. I mean hack as an unorthodox.
A way to make it more efficient, yeah.
A definition of hack, unorthodox but elegant solution. Right? So social selling is a hack. It's a hack. Content marketing is a hack.
Right.
Automation is a hack. All of these are. By the way, sponsorship of television programs in the 50s was a hack to get around the unbelievable cost of trolley car advertising, which was out of control, and direct mail, which wasn't measurable enough. Okay,
it was a way to get everything is a way to grab more attention And the only shift I think that's happened in more modern marketing is it's a way to grab more attention that's just more relevant to the person receiving it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So every new way that we market that's unexpected but effective has a limited shelf life, and that shelf life is getting smaller and smaller and smaller all the time, which puts more pressure on us to reduce the cycle time to get a new hack into place, and that's why collaboration is important. I got to tell you one thing to kind of measure for me the disconnect between sales and marketing. So when we were writing the book, we did a big survey at Deeper Media, because it's basically what Deeper Media does is we conduct surveys and we audit emails. I can tell you more about that later, but I like empirical research. So we did a survey of about 5,000 users at 135 companies across 6 different B2B verticals, and it was a really simple exploration. We wanted to understand, how long does it take for a repeated field level innovation, like a sales innovation that goes into the field and converts? How long does it take for that case study to be codified, packaged, and then integrated into the new sales process, right? So how long does it take an innovation to make its way into the actual sales process? What do you think?
From idea to real life. Oh,
Right. So I go into the field, I try a new thing, it works. We try it 2 more times, it works.
man,
Now it's how it makes sense.
yeah, I'd love to say it's like based off of size of organization, industry they serve. I wonder if that's something you can just sort of,
Believe it or not,
swap.
that wasn't statistically significant.
Oh,
I thought it
wow. Okay.
was. Yeah. Okay, so you ready?
Go.
It takes an average of 11 months for a case study to make it to market. It takes an average of 30 months for a field level innovation to be integrated into the sales process.
30 months. I mean, you have Apple developing newer products in less time, putting them in market.
So think about what I just talked about a minute ago. If the shelf life is dropping, but the innovation to market cycle time is fattening, we got a problem. And you know what that problem is? It's creating a value gap that startups can drive a hole through. That's what disruptive innovation is all about. I'm not trying to reinvent an innovator's dilemma. I'm calling this the sales and marketer's dilemma. And that is, until we learn to treat each other as partners and to create a more air of transparency and to take sprint methodology and apply it to how marketing and sales work together, we're going to be like outdated on a consistent basis, and the only people that are going to be current are the startups that are too small and too stupid and too hungry to get their next round of funding to care about the lines and to care about the history of where collaboration comes from. That's why when they go into the market and some little SaaS startup figures something out, they literally change the sales process. In our research, we say that the lag time for them on a case study is approximately 41 days. The latency for them to get a field level innovation into the market is approximately about 3 months. Okay, so they're fast, and they're fast because they have to be fast. So big companies have got to learn to have that urgency.
So do you believe that based off of that? Okay, so one side I think is that you're saying so urgency will come if you can implement deal storming, and it's not self-serving to say that. It's the work that you do and you believe it, and clearly that's a fair thing. But the other part is that the urgency has to come at that. Is it a greater level in terms of how these teams interoperate with one another? Again, back to collaboration or multidisciplinary, whatever buzzword you want to use. Or is it the fact that we don't have, like, I always feel like we talk about this stuff when you and I get super excited and people get super excited, but unless the C-suite is saying, this is what we are, this is who we are, it just doesn't happen.
Well, I don't, did you see the movie Office Space?
Sure.
Okay, remember the guy that's like, keeps coming to work and they let him go a long time ago, but he's there and he loves his stapler.
Yeah.
Remember how they fixed that? They just stopped sending him checks and they kind of fixed it in the mix, right? So I tell C-suiters all the time who ask me the same question: how do we do this? Do I give the speech? Do we find the crucible moment? I'm like, you change compensation, you change hiring, okay? You change compensation, you change hiring. First of all, when you hire people, hide the resume. Never hire a salesperson because of his production at his last job. Are you crazy? Study sports. Study stockbrokers. It doesn't transfer. I want you to ask better questions. I want you to ask, when's the last time you, Mr. Salesperson, Mr. Marketing person, Ms. Sales Manager, Ms. CMO, it's like, when's the last time that you volunteered for a project outside of your job description? Why did you do it, and what was the result? And it's a trick question, Mitch. There's no right answer. There's only one wrong answer, and that is I don't remember. I was doing my job. That is not a winner. That is not a collaborator. Real collaborators are going to tell you about 3 or 4 matrix projects they were involved in, and they got involved in them because it had a high-level impact for the whole company, and they were inspired to make a difference. And their contribution usually was to participate in some of the after-work in meetings. That's the right answer. It doesn't matter what it was. It matters that they did it. It's like the old thing when you interview a CEO and you say, tell me about the last book you read. You really don't care what the answer is. What you care about is when they say, I don't read, right? So you got to hire people that demonstrate in interviews and the interview process the willingness to participate in other people's projects. Now, some CEOs say to me, they say, well, that doesn't mean they're good at team building. I'm like, oh, heck yeah, it does, because you develop relationships long before you need them in an organization. You can't raise a team if you've never played on a team. Right? So you hire based on that. And 20% of annual compensation should be determined around collaborates, problem solves outside the group, builds bridges, give voices to other disciplines. That should be at least 20% of your annual review in terms of the quality of your pay and your stock options. You do those 2 things, Guy, and everything in an organization cascades. And I've implemented that at over a dozen companies, and it works. They're not happy. It's like when I've worked with organizations and we've implemented a rule that you don't get your commission unless you put it in Salesforce. And in fact, we will judge the percentage of your commission availability based on the percentage of information that you put in Salesforce. Well, that fixed everything in terms of getting people to participate in Salesforce.
The premise of the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it services the greater organization, but you did have a focus on B2B, correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, because B2B is a highly complex selling environment as opposed to, say, B2C, which is still a little bit more direct. But yeah, the focus of the book was B2B. And entrepreneurship too, by the way, just fundraising. It applies just as much to raising money.
So why I ask this question is because you circle in the same circles that I'm in, where you always get the question where people say, this is really great, Mitch, fantastic, but what does it mean to B2B? And I always say there's a dividing line in B2B for me. And the dividing line is it purely procurement driven, or are there other hooks you can get in, even if it is a primarily procurement driven process? So talk a little bit about that, because I think most B2B salespeople driven organizations will turn around and say, well, it doesn't really matter. It's basically procurement now.
Well, that's true. That's not true. I mean, procurement's kind of a last step, but there's all these first steps called influencers, extended value chain. There's the user, there's the IT manager, there's the field level user, there's the end client, so there's all those folks, and they're not in procurement. So I'll back up a second here. I mean, Tom Peters once told me the only difference between B2C and B2B is in B2B, you got to tell 4 more idiots.
Leave it to Tom. Yeah.
But he said the psychology is similar. And in the book, I talk about this idea that from the standpoint of procurement, guess what? B2C is starting to act like B2B. Tell me that buying a car is not a procurement activity today for the consumer.
Oh, no,
right?
Really?
Tell me that leasing an office space, for your little small business isn't something you shop to 15 people and compare online. So what is procurement? Procurement is the act of maximizing information to lower the cost of ownership. And consumers are doing their own research. Business people do their own research. The lines are really, really blurring on what it means to be in procurement.
But I mean, it acts not just as the sort of final rubber stamp or verify what the people did. I mean, I see this over, the 15, 16 years now that we've been in the agency side, because we work B2B, B2C. When we're primarily on the B2B side and it is procurement driven, I don't disagree with there are these sort of nodes that you can tap into, but I mean, I'm talking about processes that are really, really led by a group that you have no exposure to. This group does not want to meet. They don't want to field check. They're really driving this process that is essentially very similar to just filling out a government form.
Well, true. Maybe in the case of procurement of advertising, but in a lot of B2B services I've worked in, say business process outsourcing specifically, software solutions, et cetera, there's this little thing called sole source provider. It's usually indicated with an asterisk. That's considered the back door to procurement. So the issue is that procurement's strength is when there are multiple providers and you're in a bid situation. That's where they really, carry the most weight, and that's where we have the biggest challenge in navigating procurement. But the ability for you to leverage an inside champion or a deal mentor to find a way in that conceived level of the sale to become the sole source provider, I can't tell you how many times, Mitch, we've been able to get around the most stringent of procurement. I mean, I can't say the name of the company, but I worked on a missile deal. You want to talk about procurement?
Right.
You want to talk about the Pentagon's procurement program? We actually were able to get a contractor to be listed as the sole source provider on a defensive missile deal. How do you do that? You do it through collaboration. It's a very innovative sales process that gets you there. What is the difference? The difference is profitability versus loss and actually producing that product. Because if you fall into the commoditized mix of everybody else, procurement is going to make it almost impossible for you to make money. And you kind of get into this discussion like we lose money today, but we make money tomorrow. And that's another reason I think that sales innovation is so important. We got to find a way to differentiate. And sometimes we differentiate by getting the customer to rewrite the spec. And that's what we did with the Pentagon on this missile deal, was through collaborating with private enterprise companies, specifically environmental engineering companies. We found a way to challenge the original Pentagon spec to the extent that they rewrote it, but we were the only people that saw the new spec. So when the actual bid came to market, there was no competition, so there was no job for procurement to do other than to audit the actual parts in the process, which was something they knew how to do, and that had no impact on the margins. We still win the deal. It's still profitable.
So tell me, who's got you most excited in terms of business thinking in our world now?
Well, surprisingly, I really like this book by General Stanley McChrystal, Team of Teams. I mean, I really like how he thought about taking a big, huge team like when he led the forces in Iraq and breaking it down to these smaller teams, these little networks of teams, because he knew that he was up against networks of teams. And he had this philosophy that it takes a network to defeat a network. And it's interesting because think about procurement. Procurement is a little network of team. It's a little team. And it's a team behind the team. So we've got procurement, we've got governance, we've got finance, we've got technology, we've got end user, and we've got business person, and we've got influencer, and there are all these little teams. And collectively, they're a network of teams, and we can't navigate, we can't track them all down and sell them. I think we have to think the same way too. And I really like the way he brings that mentality to business. So excited about that. And I'll tell you what I'm not excited about. If you want
Sure.
to I can give you the opposite. I'm getting pretty fed up with social psychology applied to business. I got it, and I'm not going to say names, but dude, I am so fed up with the surprising truth genre of book writing. I'm not going to read any more of these.
Do you mean like the
Where
behavioral
someone,
economic stuff, that sort of stuff?
the whole trick, the whole
Yeah.
business book trick of taking conventional wisdom and shattering it, like a good stand-up comedian. It's like the next time I read another book that says, I bet you think that this makes you a more creative person. Well, guess what? There was a study we did at such and such university where we got 50 students together, and surprisingly, it was exactly the opposite. The thing I always thought was a bad idea is actually the thing that makes you more creative. I'm just starting to puke on that because I know what that's all about psychologically. It's like when Mitch Hedberg stands up in a routine and says, the tag on this shirt says dry clean only, which means it's dirty. I mean, you get a laugh. You get a response. I've seen this surprising to genre start since Freakonomics and the tipping point, and now it's like such a cascade. Where I was looking at some statistics with a publisher, and it's like, did you know that almost 2 out of 3 of all nonfiction business books that are sold are in that genre, where the whole book has been engineered to just attack a conventional wisdom using a very specific, usually self-reporting based piece of research, and that we as readers are just so surprised. We have to read it. We have to talk about it. That's not educating people. Okay, it's just entertaining people. And so I am, yeah, the social based research that reinvents the way we think about leadership and creativity, innovation. I'm just becoming drivel at this point.
Well, I love the new book. I always get such a smile on my face when I see your work, and your guy has become extremely prolific. And again, I think we talked about at the top, this idea of positivity is something that I think we really need. And I think you do a great job of delivering the content. So thanks so much for writing the book. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today, Tim. It's always fun to catch up with you. Let people know where they can best connect to your stuff.
Just visit dealstorming.net. Dealstorming.net. You can download a free chapter. I offer a 2-hour video training program if you buy a copy of the book. You can also reach me on social networks at @SandersSays.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Tim.
Thank you, Mitch.